Okay, thanks for joining us today. I'm here to talk about mobile, the forgotten attack surface. I think a lot of people think about endpoint and they think desktop, laptop. What often gets neglected is the mobile. So I'd like to discuss, how the mobile is potentially a weak point in your defenses, how threat actors, which is kind of a trendy new way of saying hackers, if you're into that, use this entry point to their advantage, which they do increasingly. So phishing sites, for example, target mobile more than anything else now. What can you do about it? Obviously, always a good proposition, and how you can integrate this into your bigger environment. So that's the bottom line. So I kind of wanted to start off with a bit of a fun fact. I don't know if people know this, but in 1973, that was actually the very first mobile phone call made by this guy, Martin Cooper, who actually phoned the competition to say, "We beat you to it," from a street in Manhattan, which I think is kind of amusing. But when you look at the phone, when the phone first came out, it was analog signals. And then that transferred into his second generation of mobile, which introduced digital transmissions, as well as adding SMS. And I don't know how old the crowd is, but some people could probably remember a time where people were actually hacking into the first gen mobile phone signals by just simply listening to radio waves. So, then with the third gen, with companies like 3, I don't know if people remember the launch of the 3 network, but that really added in the internet. So that's when things started changing a little bit. And, we all know this, of course, but, as time has gone by, what started out to be a telephone has really turned into a computer, which is basically what I'm saying here. And when you think about your own use of a mobile phone, I don't know about you, but if I want to buy something off Amazon, I generally take my phone out of my pocket and I use the application to buy things. I add things to my wish list. It's my birthday soon. If anyone wants my wish list to buy me a present, you're welcome to. But people are using this more and more. And what's actually changed this as well is, if you look back over time, when you used to access things on your mobile, it would be through the browser on the mobile originally. So you would go on to, I'm picking on Amazon because it's a nice easy one, everyone knows Amazon. But you would open up your browser and you would buy things through that browser. And then someone came up with this concept of the app, So instead of calling it programs, everything's an app these days. But apps were a real game changer because what they allowed companies to do is really consolidate all of the communication, all of the certificates that they needed into that application to make it much easier. So that kind of threw out the window any issues that you had with things like browser compatibility, it works on Firefox, but it doesn't work on Chrome or whatever, that kind of argument. So these are becoming more and more used. And, this is a stat that I got from a website called myip.com, which is just basically some nerd who's set up a website. I've got a couple myself. But this is actually in line with other industry estimates, really, on what's being used. So, it's not a hard and fast rule. But you can see, mobile leads the amount of internet access with tablet behind. So probably nothing new there. Unsurprisingly, Android is the biggest user. Now, what I'm not trying to say with this slide, I'm not trying to say that, iOS, if you've got an Apple phone, no problem, which is actually not the case. All I'm saying is that, in the same way that people say, oh, my Mac doesn't get viruses are just for PCs, it's really a numbers game at the end of the day with people that are writing malware, spyware, and so on. They want to get the biggest bang for their buck. But that being said, a lot of these things are changing, and people are writing malware, ransomware, all sorts, specifically for a broader range of platforms. We'll talk about that a bit later. Then you've also got bring your own device, which, it's kind of funny, this industry, because things go in circles. 1 minute it's client server, and it's in the cloud, it's thin client, and things go backwards and forwards with these trends. But bring your own device was obviously a big thing a couple of years ago. But guess what? But a lot of people were talking about it then. It kind of fizzled out. But one of the things that the NCSC has been written up in the Cyber Essentials 3.1 is actually focusing on securing your mobile, because that is an entry point potentially into your infrastructure. And I think what's interesting about BYOD as well is BYOD, you're basically saying that endpoint, that user is the administrator, because it's not your company's device. You're asking, your employees, if you want to have access to email, no problem, you can do that. You can just install the app on your phone. It's great, and you're in. And, that's a good and a bad thing. And, there's been a number of ways in which people have tried to approach this with things like mobile device management. But then there's a kind of a kickback on that with BYOD users, because they say, well, I can't use the apps that I was using before, and it's my phone, and you've got control over it, and you can wipe things out, so they uninstall things. So you're kind of in a bit of a catch-22. But ultimately, when you have BYOD, if a device is owned by the user, it's my phone. But then the actual data on it is actually the intellectual property of your organization, whatever that may be. So, and this is defined by the NCSC, so, I didn't make this up. But, mobile is probably the most common BYOD device. There's a few others where you might have users at home using their desktop to access email. They might be doing that via Office 365. People seem to think, it's in the browser, no problem, that's bulletproof. That's not actually the case. But it really is the most common device. And people think, oh, it's just add email on the phone, no problem. So there you go. Thing with the phone, and it's kind of another teaching you to suck egg slide, but everything's always connected all the time. People very rarely turn their telephones off. And in a previous career, I did a lot with mobile networks, and they were looking at the statistics for their customer base for various reasons, and they found that some people just didn't turn their phone off for 6 months. And they didn't, like some people, particularly people more senior in age, very rarely leave an area. So, that's potentially another way of getting consistent connectivity with somebody. And it's really the gateway to everything. So you think about things that you have on your phone, you think, oh yeah, I'll put 2FA on there, so I've got these one-time passwords, so when I log in, I've got this 2FA. Well, if you get control of that mobile device, you've basically got control of that 2FA. You've got things like any cached information. All apps are not created equal. A lot of people think that if you download it from the Apple Store or from Google Play, then it's going to be a great, there's going to be no problem because, it comes from Apple, so it's got to be good. Not always the case. But, there's things like access to cloud storage, where you might have OneDrive. I have OneDrive on my phone. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I don't do it. But, that can contain proprietary information, which contains information about clients. It's a computer, basically, at the end of the day. And people just forget about it. They think, oh yeah, there's nothing happens with an iPhone. iPhone's bulletproof, they do a really good job. And they do, but as with any computer system, there's going to be a weakness. So how do people take this entry point to their advantage? Well, as I've already said, there's 4 computers on this screenshot. We've got a tablet, we've got a good old-fashioned laptop, we've got the phone, we've also got the watches as well. All of these things potentially are an infection vector for a threat actor to take advantage. So Excuse me. So, this isn't kind of a beat up Google or beat up Apple session. Vulnerabilities are seen on these systems all the time. And I think, anyone's got a mobile phone. I don't know about you, but I seem to get more updates from Apple saying, oh, you need to update to the latest version. And that gap between those patches seems to be becoming shorter and shorter over time. So it's really no different from any other computer. And spyware is being used to target individuals. And I've actually got an interesting use case about that coming up. But 80% of the phishing sites which are out there, which are actually looking to harvest data, spyware, are actually either targeting mobile specifically or are doing hybrid spyware, which could effectively infect both a desktop or a mobile device. So they're getting very, very clever at this. And, building that for a desktop and a mobile application is, obviously to an advantage if you are a threat actor looking to infect as many machines as possible. So there's a number of cases where the application that you've downloaded from a site, and you can Google this if you like. The irony of that's kind of funny, but Grift Horse is a really good example of that. Well, what Grift Horse did was they produced I don't know if it's 200 exactly, but they produced a number of apps, and then they included the Trojan inside of all of those applications, and then they published it on Google Play. Now, what I'm not trying to say to you is everyone's gone out and they've gone, oh, there's a new app, I'm just going to install it. But what they did was they combined this in with social engineering techniques as a way of saying, hey, we're having a party, and, I've got this polling app, so you can just tell me what days work for you or what times work for you, that kind of thing. And you can just uninstall it afterwards if you want. So they go onto Google Play, and it's got to be good, right? Because it's on Google Play, so you're not going to have a problem there. But unfortunately, this was actually on Google Play and the App Store for months. I think it was about 3 months all told that this was on there. And what they did with this Trojan application was they were able to gain the phone number of that person, which may or may not be readily available. Because let's say I'm targeting the CISO of a company, and that CISO, he doesn't put his mobile number on his signatures because he doesn't want phone calls from annoying salespeople, let's say, right? So he can then, I'm going to send him an email, spoof to someone else, very carefully constructed social engineering trick. He installs it, I get his number, I can use that for a further objective to potentially take advantage of his phone. And one of the things that they did, there's several things that they did with this, but I'm sure everyone knows what a rat or a Trojan is. It's basically a piece of software that gives you control of that machine, but they subscribed them to premium SMS services was one thing, and also then went through their phone book and looked at all of the people that they were connected to, and then sent them SMS messages from this phone, and it just went on from there. So, people were saying, well, I've got this 30 euro charge on my phone bill, and they query it with the phone company, and the phone company said, well, you sign up for it. So you're in this nightmare situation where you're chasing your tail. This is a pretty tame version, but ultimately, you have a threat actor who might not actually be targeting you, which is one of the other things that people often miss. They might actually be targeting somebody else. But in a chain of supplier, manufacturer, and actor, this is obviously a very simple example. But if I can compromise the manufacturer, and the manufacturer has, let's say, a site-to-site VPN with the supplier, I can compromise the supplier. And if I can compromise the supplier, and that supplier has access connections to the target, I can then compromise the target, and then I can then perform my actions on objectives, which might be still data, whatever that might be. We've actually done a number of installs for customers within the defence sector where they have manufacturers that are just making parts for aircraft or missiles or what have you, which they've actually been nation state attacked by, pick your country of choice. Let's pick Russia. They're pretty unpopular at the moment. But, as a means to then compromise their way into, a big manufacturer at the top of the chain, sort of like Lockheed Martin or BAE Systems. One of the really interesting use cases, I'm sure people have heard of Pegasus, was part of the NSO group. There's a really good program on iPlayer, which is very entertaining, which goes through the whole Pegasus thing. It was still on there on Monday when I finished this presentation off. But it's called The Spy on Your Mobile. And it actually talks about the Pegasus spyware, which was installed on iOS and Android machines, and basically gave people full access to that machine. So, that mobile, same. So they were able to use the camera, the microphone, turn it off, on and off whenever they wanted, access to WhatsApp, things like Telegram, Signal, all of these other apps, because if you control that machine, well, you control that machine. So, and this was actually delivered as in two ways, and they targeted people. Angela Merkel was probably the most high-profile person to get infected with this, but this was done as an SMS message. You need to click on this link. And what's kind of interesting about those SMS messages, I don't know if most people probably use Office 365, right? And if you click an email within, if you click a link within an email, it says, we're checking this URL for you. And they do that, and they do that well. Don't get me wrong. But what they don't do is they don't appreciate that you could create a website which runs JavaScript. It's very simple to do. If you want the code, I can share it with you. But you could connect to one website, which then forwards you to another website, which then forwards you to another website. And, we've seen iterations of 6 deep plus of these redirections where you click on that link and it looks, completely innocent, but it takes you through all of these things. Now, if you don't have protection on your mobile of any shape or form, it's just going to go there. And what that does is, that was delivered by a link via SMS. It was also delivered as a man-in-the-middle attack, which they use, which is a little bit more sophisticated. But basically, the threat actor then owns that mobile. And this is actually really worth a view. I'm a bit of a nerd, but my wife watched it and she said that it wasn't too techy. So interesting shout. But Pegasus isn't magic. So what Pegasus really did was it really took some vulnerabilities which no one knew about and took advantage of them. And what's actually interesting about the NSO group is they are affiliated with, not officially, of course, but they're affiliated with the Israeli government. And what they did was they took some very experienced professional programmers who took advantage of these flaws in iOS as well as Android, and basically wrote software and then went around the world selling it. Now, there's a lot of questions about the morality of who they sold to. Like, Azerbaijan, for example, is one which is in the program, is well worth a view. But effectively, they've commercially written a product which is spyware, which they've commercially sold to governments. Now, they're not the only players in the game, so I'm not going to say, the CIA are out to get you, stick a tinfoil hat on or anything like that. But if these people are doing it, there's other people doing it as well. And there's a number of advanced persistent threat, or APT groups, which are out there, which are specifically targeting flaws in mobile devices, because there's a common conception by a lot of threat actors that everyone's forgotten about it. Everyone's forgotten about this way to get into the network. So, I could get hold of people's emails, and those emails might have passwords in. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I've emailed passwords to people. I'm ashamed to say it, but I think, if you're honest with yourself, we probably all have. Or we've received an email where someone sent one email and said, here's the Excel spreadsheet, it's in a password protected zip file. And then 2 minutes later, they send you an email, saying, here's the password, which is kind of crazy. But I think you get the idea there. So what can you do about it? Well, obviously, using technologies like machine learning, what we've done with our solution is we've looked at the way in which a threat actor, which is often used interchangeably between a piece of malicious software to an actual physical person, but how that actor effectively exploits that operating system. Are they accessing parts of the file system, because it is basically a computer? Are they accessing parts of the file system they should? Are they inserting certificate root authorities into that mobile, so that when you click on that link, it says, this website is A-OK because the certificate checks out. Because, if you can own that computer, you can do whatever you like, right? So we look at things like that. We also look at libraries which are changed within the mobile. We look at networks the device is connected to as well as looking at the applications which are installed on the device. And we would flag any application which is doing things that it shouldn't as tampering. So when you install an app on your phone, it says, we've all done it, right? It says, this app has the access to the following things, and you go, oh yeah, next, no problem. But if you actually read through them, like Snapchat, for example, which I'm obviously too old to use Snapchat, but if you look at the installation of Snapchat, it says this has access to your contacts, it has access to your location, it has access to your photos, it has access to your files. It kind of, it's kind of spyware that everyone's kind of found as acceptable. So, how far do you want that to go? And there's a certain amount of trust that you have in these companies, but that's a legitimate, Snapchat is a well-known application. But if you take an app where someone said, hey, I've got this great new app, it's got this swipey keyboard, and you can type really quickly, and it's so much better than the Android one, it's so much better than the iOS one, and you install it, and that could just be a keylogger, which those keystrokes, that's not really a massive amount of data in the grand scheme of things if you were to take that off that device. So, you could log in with your 2FA password, put in your password. If they're recording that, they can use that information in an automated fashion to log in and potentially change things. So nothing new there. But this kind of ties in with the whole concept of endpoint detection and response, because the phone ultimately is an endpoint. So here we're looking at the way in which things are accessed, what's in the memory, what's being executed, and then we're correlating that through with the machine learning, providing a means to respond to that and an understanding of what's actually going on that endpoint. And I'm kind of saying endpoint is any device. I'm not saying endpoint is specifically a PC. It could be anything. So, excuse me. Ultimately, an EDR in our term, which is endpoint detection response, and every vendor's got a slightly different idea about this, but from our point of view, this contains two major components. The endpoint sensor, which actually collects and processes that data, and then we have the security analytics, which is what we do in the cloud. So that's what actually brings all of this together. Which brings me to my next point, which is how do we integrate this into the bigger picture? Because it's all very well saying, I've got a problem on this machine, and I've got a problem on this machine, but what's really useful is when you actually integrate that in together. And that's really where XDR comes in. And I like to really think of EDR as looking at an individual endpoint and XDR looking at the whole train set. So when we extend with XDR that endpoint activity, we can tie this in with other telemetry that we've taken from other devices, such as Office 365 or network traffic. And then if we integrate this in, we're actually able to correlate that detection, which is really what we're doing within the cloud, and then visualizing that in a way that really makes sense. So you can understand that, yeah, okay, I've got a piece of malware has executed on this machine, which shouldn't have, and it's got through all of the other checks. How did it get there? And what's very useful to understand, particularly as you continuously go through that life cycle model of looking at your security and revisiting things, and then potentially improving your security posture, you really want to know, how did that get in here? I mean, I think that's a very good question to ask. And what extended detection and response does is it gives you that. So you can say, oh, this came in via an app on a mobile phone, which was saved to OneDrive, which was shared with someone who opened it on their laptop, double click, unzip the file, and they're in. So, these things can happen. And threat actors are getting very clever. I mean, they always have been, but getting very clever about how they take advantage of this. So on the other side of things, there may be some of you thinking, well, I haven't got time to sit in front of a computer 24/7 to be able to do that. And that really has a couple of challenges. You might have people within your organization who have limited cybersecurity experience, which is common. You may not be able to afford to pay the large salaries that these people command. You also may have a challenge in terms of defending yourself against more of these sophisticated threats. So, that sophisticated threat side is really covered by our extended detection and response solution, which is really bringing that together. But we do offer a managed detection and response solution, which actually really extends your SOC. And my favorite quote from one of our customers, which is a large university in the UK, he said, "I love it because I get my Friday night back." So whilst you might be thinking, well, all of the people in my team, they're great, they know exactly what they're doing, but they need to sleep, which my boss doesn't understand, but they need to sleep, they need to eat, they need a break. And being able to offer this, we actually offer an MDR service in a 12-hour Panama shift. If you want to know more about that, it's probably best to Google it. But what this does is this gives us an overlap, which allows people to look eyes on glass, so to speak, 24/7, and react to those threats. And this is a bit of a longer conversation, but this allows us to do things like threat hunting within inside of your organization, which is maybe not something which your employees may be equipped to be able to do. We can also provide responses based on a conversation that we have with you about do's and don'ts. Can we reboot this machine? Can we restart this service? Can we isolate these files? And that kind of thing is part of the onboarding process, which usually takes about between 30 days to 90 days, depending on the complexity of the environment. But this allows you to tie all of these things in together. So that's the sales pitch part of the presentation. If you'd like to know a bit more about Bitdefender and want to continue the conversation, please feel free to do so. I've finished right on time. Enjoy your lunch. Thanks very much.